Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you all had a good week. Welcome back to the channel for episode number 13 of the Ask Me Anything series. At this point, I'm sure all of you know how this works. You ask me NHL-related questions, I pick some of them out and answer them in a video. Now, obviously, I can't answer every question in the video, but just know I do read all of the comments. I appreciate every single one, so huge thank you to everybody who took the time out of your day and went and left a comment on the post. Let's jump right into things. The first question comes from Tori Guido. I hope I said your name properly. Will Nedeljkovic, Greiss split the starts, much like Bernier and Greiss did, or will Nedeljkovic be given the reins as the bona fide workhorse, 55 to 60 starts? My expectation is it's going to be similar to what we saw with Bernier and Greiss from the 2020-21 season. I think Greiss has earned that. He put up really good stats to end the year, although he got off to a miserable start to the season. Overall, he was pretty good, so I don't really see either of these guys being the workhorse. I think for the most part they're going to share the net, but I do imagine Nedeljkovic will start more games than Thomas Greiss. If I had to make a prediction, I would say Nedeljkovic gets into like 45 to 50 games as the starter. This next comment comes from UAV, who says, do you think NHL players are going to the Olympics? I put this in the video because when I woke up today and checked Twitter, I learned that that is exactly what is happening. NHL players will indeed be going to the Olympics. They finally worked out some type of deal, and that is amazing news. In 2018, when there was no NHL players, it was still watchable. You know, Kirill Kaprizov was playing for Russia, Kovalchuk was playing for Russia, Datsuk, and it was cool to see Germany go on the run that they went on. But to me, international hockey is at its best when the best players in the world are there and playing. I want to see the matchups between Canada and USA at full strength, Russia and Canada at full strength, Finland and Sweden even. I'm really looking forward to the Olympics now. I'm definitely going to cover them on the channel. I'll probably continue my series of trying to predict Olympic rosters now that we actually know NHL players are going, so I'm pretty pumped up about this news. Next up, we have a question from Hugh Barkers, who says, will Ben Bishop ever be a #1 goalie again, considering his health? On top of his health, when you take into account his age as well, I think he's 34, 35 years old now, I don't think we ever see Bishop be a true #1 again. I would imagine he's probably going to have at least a couple more decent seasons where he puts up pretty good numbers, but I don't think we'll ever see Ben Bishop play like 55 to 60 games in a season ever again, and I think the Dallas Stars know that as well. I mean, look at what they went and did this offseason. They already have Bishop and Hudobin, and they went out and signed Braden Holtby to a 1-year deal, and I imagine the reason that they did that is to get some insurance at the goaltending position because there is those uncertainties when it comes to Ben Bishop's health. Moving along now, this question comes from Stony037. Will there be any RFA holdouts on contracts going into the season, and who would you predict? I would imagine we're going to see at least one. I mean, it's already September 3rd. There's going to be preseason NHL games this month. If I had to make a prediction on a player that I think could hold out, I'm going to go with Robert Thomas in St. Louis, just based off of St. Louis's salary cap situation. On Cap Friendly, they have a projected $1.531 million in cap space, and although Robert Thomas is pretty much the only player the Blues have left to sign, $1.31 million or whatever the number is, that's not enough to sign Robert Thomas. That's a player who I think could make north of $5 million on his next contract. Now, I'm sure St. Louis is still trying hard to move Vladimir Tarasenko, and if they successfully did, then that's $7.5 million off the books, and you know, maybe less depending on what type of salary they bring back. But at this point, it's looking less and less likely that Tarasenko is actually going to get traded. I'm interested to see what happens here. Doug Armstrong definitely has his work cut out for him. Now, I know you can go over the salary cap by, I believe, 10% in the offseason, but they would still have to get below the cap by the start of the season anyways, so they're going to have to move out some salary somehow. From Caden A, could we see Evander Kane traded before the season starts, or is that a long shot? Just with everything going on when it comes to Evander Kane outside of hockey right now, I don't really want to get into it, but I'm sure you guys all know the situation. I would say it's probably a long shot because what team would want to take that player on and potentially, you know, ruin their locker room? Based off of all the reports we've gotten over the past couple of weeks, it sounds like that is what has happened in San Jose. Apparently, there are numerous players on the Sharks that want Evander Kane traded. It was reported that some even went to the San Jose Sharks front office and said, you have to choose between me or Evander Kane. If he doesn't get traded, then I want to get traded. It's a pretty crazy situation overall. I think Evander Kane is a player that would almost be impossible to trade right now. This next question comes from random hockey YouTuber who says, when will the Penguins finally drop off? Every time people said they would, they just performed better. I'm honestly at the point where I'm never going to write off the Penguins again until Malkin and Crosby are retired, or at least until we've seen a significant drop in their performances, until they're no longer elite players, because at this point in their careers, they are both still very much so elite. Sidney Crosby especially is still one of the absolute best players on the planet, so until that changes, I don't really see the Penguins going anywhere. They've proven people wrong too many times. Next up, we we have a question from Big No, who says, if Jack Eichel is traded, who's Buffalo's top line center for next year? If Eichel is traded, I think there's honestly a decent chance that they get in return a player who would then be their first line center. If not though, and they just get a bunch of prospects and draft picks, it would have to be Casey Middlestat, wouldn't it? Because Sam Reinhart's gone now as well. I don't think you want to have Zemgus Girgensons as your first line center. So yeah, just off the top of my head, I feel like Casey Middlestat would be next in line. Again, if they don't get someone in return for Eichel that could take that spot. Moving along now, this next question comes from Hayden Hallett, who says, any chance that Keith Petruzzelli's signing with the Leafs will come back to haunt the Red Wings? Guy was a 2017 third round pick of Detroit. If you were to ask me this and Detroit didn't trade for Alex Nedeljkovic and didn't draft Sebastian Cossa, I would have said, yeah, it probably could. I mean, up until Detroit got Nedeljkovic and drafted Sebastian Cossa, Keith Petruzzelli was viewed as the potential future starter for the Red Wings. But given the fact that Detroit now seemingly has their goaltending position for the future figured out with Nedeljkovic and Sebastian Cossa, I think they're going to be fine. And going off of all the reports, it seems like things were kind of out of Detroit's hands. Keith Petruzzelli didn't want to sign in Detroit. He played his 4 years in college, and then he had the right to sign with whatever team he wanted to sign with. From Jonas Scott, the Avs are currently the Cup favorites. With their turnover, do you think this is reasonable, and why or why not? Also, I really appreciate the kind words. I think it's extremely reasonable, and it makes a lot of sense as to why the Avalanche are Cup favorites for next season or heading into the season. You look at their roster on paper, top to bottom, they are the most stacked team in the NHL. The one question mark people might have is the goaltending position, losing Philip Grubauer, but I am a pretty big fan of Darcy Kemper. I think he's going to do just fine, especially when you consider everyone Tampa Bay lost this offseason: Coleman, Gaudreau, Gord, Tyler Johnson, David Savard. It makes a lot of sense as to why Colorado are viewed as the Stanley Cup favorites. But hey, remember, the favorites usually don't win in the NHL. Moving along now, this next question comes from Christian Wada, who says, since Franz Nielsen and Luke Glendening have left the Red Wings, what players do you think will wear the A next season? Also, I really appreciate the kind words. I want to say they'll give it to guys, like Tyler Bertuzzi and Filip Hronek, but I feel like the two A's are just going to go to some other veterans on the team right now. I would not be surprised if we see Nick Leddy get an A veteran defenseman who's been around a long time. He's won Stanley Cups, so I could definitely see Nick Leddy getting one of the A's, and I could also see them giving one to Sam Gagner. He was obviously re-signed on a one-year deal by the Red Wings this offseason. It seems like they really like a lot of what he brings off the ice. It seems like he's a really good guy, great locker room leader, and I definitely wouldn't complain about that. I think those would be two pretty good options. This next question comes from Nad E. Ollie. I apologize if I butchered your name, but the question is, do you think there's a possibility of Jack Eichel going to Montreal due to the lack of center depth if the Canadiens decide not to match the offer sheet? And if so, what do you think the deal could possibly be? If the Montreal Canadiens do not match the offer sheet, it's almost a given that they're going to go out and look to add a center and most likely use the draft picks that they got as compensation for losing Kotkaniemi to get that centerman. I really can't see it being Jack Eichel though, because if they want to go out and get Eichel, they're most likely going to have to give up another massive piece or two on top of those first and third round picks, and I really don't think Montreal would be willing to part with either Nick Suzuki or Cole Caulfield in an Eichel trade, and I feel like one of those guys at least is what Buffalo would be asking for. There's actually been a couple of reports recently linking the Montreal Canadiens to Christian Dvorak of the Arizona Coyotes. I think that's a lot more likely to happen than them going out and making a blockbuster trade for Jack Eichel, and I think Christian Dvorak would actually be a pretty good fit as Montreal's second line center behind Suzuki. This next question comes from Ian Oman, who says, what centers do you think would be realistic for the Wild to go after? Eichel is obviously not one of them. We need to keep the cap in mind for the next 3 seasons after this one. That's definitely true after buying out Parise and Suter. Sean Monahan comes to mind, Evgeny Kuznetsov as well, but that one would be a little bit pricier, so I don't think they'll go with him just based off of his cap hit. It's hard to say. I honestly don't think we're going to see the Wild get a center from now until the start of the season, because they still have Eric Sinek and Victor Rask, who were their top 2 centers this past season, and it worked out just fine. I mean, Victor Rask played very well with Zuccarello and Kaprizov. If the Wild can make it work with those two as their top 2 centers over the next, year or two, I think they're going to be just fine, because then you have a player like Marco Rossi coming up, who I think is going to be an absolute stud. It's just a matter of when he's actually going to be ready to play in the NHL. Obviously, he faced a bit of a setback getting COVID shortly after the draft. From Daniel 12, based on all the defensemen who got paid this summer, what will Charlie McAvoy get as his deal expires at the end of this season? I think a lot of that obviously depends on what type of season McAvoy has in 2021-22.
he is a top 20 defenseman in the league, hands down, probably close to top 10. Like, Charlie McAvoy is extremely good. He's extremely underrated, I think, as well. Even if he has a bit of a down year, which I don't think is going to happen, he's still going to get paid. Just based on comparables, I think we could see him get something similar to the contract Miro Heiskanen got from the Dallas Stars, which I believe was, 8 years, around $8 million a season, something like that. Probably a little bit less because Boston is usually extremely good with re-signing their players. We saw that in the Bergeron, Pastrnak, and Marchand contracts. So if I had to make a final prediction, I'm going to say 7 years, around $7.5 million, something like that. And now for the final question of the video, this one comes from Jackson Graney, who says, if you could bring back any jersey from any team in history, which jersey would you bring back and why? Man, this is a tough one. I don't think it would be any jersey Detroit has ever had because, I mean, for the most part, they've always had close to the same jersey with the exception of like the Winter Classics and Stadium Series, and I don't think those count here because they were never a full-time jersey. Just off the top of my head, if I had to pick one, even though I don't like watching Buffalo very much because of the state that team is in, it would definitely be their black goat head jerseys. I think that's what it was, a goat head, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put a couple of pictures on the screen. Those jerseys are absolutely beautiful, and I feel like in an Adidas version, it would be incredible. So that is going to wrap up episode number 13 of the Ask Me Anything series. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Again, like I said at the start of the video, I really do appreciate every single one of you who took the time out of your day to go ahead and leave a question on the post. And also, as always, if you guys have any video suggestions, stuff maybe you want to see on the channel from now till the start of the season, let me know down below in the comment section. I'm always open to hearing your guys' ideas.